Hello, I'm Sarah Bradbury from The Upcoming, and welcome to another episode in our podcast interview series. Today, I'm chatting with Elizabeth Meriwether and Kim Rosenstock about all things dying for sex. It's a brand new Disney Plus series starring Michelle Williams, as I think you've never seen her before. She plays Molly, who, after a terminal cancer diagnosis, decides to leave her marriage to explore pleasure, push boundaries, and truly live in the time she has left. She's supported by her best friend Nikki, who's played by Jenny Slate. The whole thing is bold, it's irreverent, it's hilarious, and it tackles sex, desire, and mortality in a way that I don't think we've seen on screen before. So let's hear from Elizabeth and Kim. Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to me today. Absolutely been blasting through this series. I've just been loving every second of it. So huge congrats to the show. But for people who haven't watched it yet, could you give us a brief intro? What can they expect when they tune in to Dying for Sex?
It's a story, a true story from a podcast called Dying for Sex about a woman named Molly and her best friend Nikki. And she finds out that her cancer is back and it's stage 4, and she leaves her husband and sort of embarks on this journey to find herself and fall in love with herself through sex. I think a very human story, and there's a lot of comedy in it, and obviously really serious things that come up, but it's like handled with hopefully a lot of heart and humanity. Keep talking about like the humanness of it all. The big, messy, like goofy humanness of these issues.
It's a love story, and it's a comedy, and it's as much about life as it is about death. And I think it's also a love story between these two best friends who are on this journey together. And it's the story of someone who's sick and also someone who's a caretaker. So I think those are two experiences that we were really excited to put on screen.
And just watching it just felt like something I'd never seen before. And perhaps, like you said, the combination of sort of maybe there's like such a taboo still around some of these topics. And like you say, but it's really handled with this sort of biting wit and humor and irreverence, which just felt really fresh. But maybe just taking a step back, you can tell us about how, the show came about, how you came across the podcast, Molly's story, and at what point you realized, this could work really well as a TV show.
A producer friend of mine sent me the podcast, and I just tore through it, and it just drew me in. And then the episodes initially were like really just about sex and kind of laughing and sort of telling just kind of crazy stories. And then towards the end of the pilot, podcast, it got like a lot deeper and into kind of Molly's history. And then on the podcast, it's the kind of incredible thing where you hear her voice like in hospice, as she's really dying, like talking about what she's seeing and feeling and thinking about her life. And it's so compelling. But it's a podcast, and it's, it's different than what a show would be. So I think Kim and I really just, we were just trying to kind of get the spirit of a lot of the things that they were talking about and put it into like a story that it had more developed characters and possible love interests and things like that. So it was, but I mean, I feel like the first time I heard it, I knew it felt new to me as well. It felt like you're saying you haven't seen that on television. I felt like I hadn't heard that story before being told. And I loved the way that it was such a difficult mix of tones. I like, what I mean? Like my favorite kind of comedy is the comedy that is unexpected and really about the characters as opposed to just like punchlines and jokes, which are great, but it's my favorite kind of comedy. So I felt like I just was like really interested in the tone and the mix of genres.
I felt the same way when Liz asked me to come on board and join her, and I listened to the podcast. I was like just blown away by the intimacy of it, and the idea of making a show that could explore that kind of intimacy was just really exciting to put that on screen. And it's this very like small specific story about these two friends, but it also felt like it touches on so many larger themes. And, by the end of the podcast, I always say like, I felt like it was about like everything suddenly, and it had expanded out in a way that I hadn't experienced before. Really, while listening to something, I was suddenly feeling every possible emotion. So it was just, it feels like a very emotional but cathartic thing to put to put a show like that on television.
I mean, yeah, talking about the comedy, I mean, it's just had me laughing out loud so many times. This line about, oh, you've got an orgasm from listening to a podcast on the tube, or when she's masturbating to watching that scene with Keanu Reeves in Speed. And I don't know, maybe it's just like, being a millennial woman, there's a lot that spoke to me in that.
Yeah.
And I wondered how much of like the dialogue or the scenarios was that there in the podcast and the storytelling? Were those things that you kind of thrashed out when you were writing, so you had some bullet points to go from, and then you kind of filled in the gaps? Like, I mean, how did you land all these brilliant moments and these brilliant lines?
It was sort of a combination, I think. There was so much great stuff on the podcast. And then we got into our writer's room and we started opening it up and talking about all these other things that we could, have her do. And we had a long list. Many amazing moments or scenarios that didn't make it into the show, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it was a combination of stuff that we thought was really funny that we would want to see, and then a lot of stuff that was from the real story, and that we couldn't believe, when we were listening to it, that she had really done.
It was a lot of fun to write. I mean, it was hard, but it was a lot of fun to just it felt like, honestly, I think for both of us, just like an outpouring of like a lot of experiences that we'd had, and, that I don't necessarily need to get into, on the record, but it was like a lot of like kind of pent up stories. But, I mean, I will say also, I feel like Michelle and Jenny just completely make those jokes and the sort of tone of it work in a way that is unbelievable, and like just feel so grateful to have actresses that are comfortable with switching like that, like to be able to kind of talk about having orgasms on the subway and like then switch into like fully sobbing in a hallway, like it's just like but it's real, it's how life works. So we just like, I think we're obviously like so lucky to work with those two women who were incredible.
And maybe the fact that it is so funny in that way, or feels refreshing, is sort of symptomatic of the fact that maybe we don't see women talking about things in this really frank way, which is actually the way women often do talk to each other, the way we do talk about sex. And I was thinking, even like, everyone goes on about, and I know I go on about Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Fleabag a bit too much, but it's true that even, that's felt like a watershed moment, even like from her opening episode. And I wondered if there was some of that DNA running through this, even the fact that she's obviously not breaking the fourth wall, but we hear her inner monologue. So perhaps it opens up sort of another side to what we can hear from her character than if she was just playing it straight.
A big challenge, because the podcast is basically like listening to these two women talk, and you're like loving kind of being a part of it. But what we wanted to do with the show was also tell this really intimate internal story about Molly, healing and the problem for us as writers was just like, how do we show what's going on in her head during sex? Like, how do we show like what the experience is of having sex in your brain? Which is like, and I do think Fleabag had this that's using that device and then using it, so tying it together with what was emotionally going on for her character in such a brilliant way. It was a huge inspiration, I think, to like many people, including us, but just the idea of like, how can you use some of these like stylistic choices to get deeper into character, and so that it doesn't become like, it's not just like showing off or like just trying to kind of make something cool. It's like you're using these devices to tell a story and to illuminate something about a character. So I think like we talked a lot about these bigger stylistic choices as ways to just understand something that felt like it was a bit out of our world, the process of dying, being aware that you have stage 4 cancer. You are a little bit outside of reality, like it felt right for kind of what she was going through. And she does, as a character, I think, seem like she had a lot of secrets. She had a lot of things that she wasn't saying out loud. So that also made sense in terms of like the voiceover. But Absolutely. I mean, and we had our director, Shannon Murphy, who has done a couple shows in the UK, I think, but like that she was just fearless about those devices and the stylized stuff in a way that I think I like as a writer was just a little bit like, well, what are the rules of everything? And she's kind of like, it doesn't matter. Let's just tell the story. Yeah. And so that was really refreshing. And at one point she had like Michelle just like swat the camera away. We didn't end up putting it in the show, but I mean, it was just this kind of like crazy fun energy of like, we don't have to like worry about, like if everything makes perfect sense, we just have to tell the story. And I think that was really important.
Yeah, it was important that everything felt emotionally true, and that you would that was sort of one of our guiding points, I think. And then yeah, like what Liz was saying, also in Fleabag, it's like this amazing situation where she's experiencing grief, but she's going through life, just a normal days in her life, and that absurdity of having to have those two very different experiences at the same time, and how it is kind of what is the foundation of a tragic comedy, that life continues to just be mundane or like ridiculous, while you are carrying around with you this other enormous experience in your head. And for us, it was, like Liz was saying, Molly, once she gets that diagnosis, she's carrying around this knowledge that she is dying. But that doesn't mean that she's still not just like going on a date or like going to the store or waiting in the doctor's office, like life just continues to move on, and you have to live your day in both worlds. And so that was also, I think, part of what was exciting for us to figure out, how do you show the comedy in that, and also really the reality of that.
I mean, Michelle Williams, one of my all-time favorite actresses, think back Dawson's Creek or Blue Valentine, or recently, working with Steven Spielberg. But this is actually not a role I've seen her do before. Maybe it is this sort of mix of the drama, but the comedy. And I just feel like she's loving every second of it. So, what was it like having her on set? And then also, like you said, that female friendship she really brings to life with Jenny. And then this really complex relationship with Jay, where, Steve clearly does love her. But, she's facing this prospect where really, the dynamic between them has been irrevocably altered by her illness, and she can't get it back. And it's taking a bit of courage, isn't it, from her to be able to sort of push him away. So it's a great trio you've got there at the center.
Yeah, and also Rob Delaney. I feel like that, like the sort of like, I feel like that was like a revelation for me of just the weirdness of that love story. I love. Yeah, I mean, Michelle, it was like really the show could not have happened without her in that part. You know what I mean? Like it was like her ability to just dig into the deepest, darkest moments, and then also just have so much fun with it. I mean, it was like, I think there was times when she was like jumping around and dancing on set. I feel like it's just sort of like, I think it was really fun. There were parts of it that were really fun to do, and I don't think, I she's done comedy before. Actually, the movie Dick is one of my favorite movies. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a really good movie. But I think this was like a sort of new experience for her as well. And there was a lot of the way that Kim and I are used to making comedy is by throwing out extra jokes to actors, like, and it was like interesting at first, because I think I was like, she was just so prepared, and like she'd worked on the character so hard and the scenes and the words, and then to kind of go in and be like, can you like make a fart noise with your mouth? It's like just kind of like the dumbest stuff. And I think she loved it. I think she really loved kind of like the way that comedy keeps you on your toes in that way, where you sort of like, you need to be a little bit things need to kind of feel like loose and free. And I think she got a lot out of that. And for Jenny, it was like, she is one of the funniest people out there, but then to like see how emotional and incredible heartbreaking she is in so many moments, it was really exciting. I don't know. And the fact that they feel like they're best friends and they met on the show was like also crazy. I'm like, I think it was something new for both of them in a really great way. And I'm so excited for people to see it, because I think they really are like some of the best actresses we have, and it just feels like I'm excited that like the world gets to see it soon, to like see all the things that they can do.
They all bring such a humanity and honesty to every situation, and so we could throw these like Liz is saying, like absurd or like funny jokes at that, but they always make it, it always sounds so truthful. All of the actors that we had, I think, kept the story feeling really grounded, and at the same time were people that naturally just scanned for humor. And so that was like a great gift. And then what you were saying about Steve, for once, like I think something that was so important to us, and we talked about it a lot, was like making sure that character didn't ever feel like a straw man or a villain, and that it's not a situation where it was a black and white thing. It was just that she didn't feel good with him anymore. And so she decided to seek out people who she felt good with. And the person who makes her feel the best is her best friend. And if she only has a limited amount of time left, she wants to be around the people who make her feel alive and like the best version of herself.
I mean, there was just literally no room for prudishness or pearl clutching and any of this. Either for the people on set or the people watching. Was there a moment where you're like, oh, this is too far? Or Michelle said, oh, I just couldn't possibly? Or was everyone just gung-ho?
I was honestly like, when we turned the script in where she pees on the guy, I was like, I was like waiting for Michelle to kind of call and be like, guys, I'm sorry, like it's too much. And she was just so down, like she was so open to it, and like she understood. I think because like we really went into it wanting all of those moments to be based in character and to be like never, like we're never making fun of quote unquote crazy sex. Like we're just showing like how human sexuality has such a wider scope than I think what you usually see on television, and that there's like nothing wrong with that, and it's not, that isn't the butt of the joke. The comedy comes from just like these people just trying to kind of find themselves in each other in like weird situations, But yeah, I mean, I think like when we were on set, and I just remember like deciding choosing the prop pee based on like the color of the pee, and like just like that, like I just feel like that was like a moment for me where I was like, wow, all right, like what am I doing, what's happening right now? And I am a bit of a prude, so the whole process for me was I just got used to kind of covering my face with my hands and blushing a little bit when I needed to.
We had a lot of really like the most embarrassing production meetings that I think
right, yeah,
it was like just which kind of cot cage, like just tons of cot cage pictures on a screen for us to look at, or like how iridescent should the wings of the penis be, and like the questions you don't expect to get asked at your job, I don't know.
Do you remember that production? I feel like there was one moment where we were like, can you just take the vibrators like off this big screen? Like it was just like a whole page full of vibrators, and I was like, we just need to like take them off the screen so we can all like
so many vibrators.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean it was but we had an amazing intimacy coordinator as well. So I mean it was all kind of wild, but I think we all felt like there was a reason behind it, and we weren't just doing it, to shock people or to, we were really aware of like needing to tell the story and how important it was to the story to do.
I think this idea of like getting rid of shame around sex that is quote unquote normal was a big mission for us, and was for Molly, the real person who this story is based on as well. And that there's a character in the show that even says to Molly, like, what is normal sex? Who gets to decide what that is? And I think that's a really that's sort of at the heart of a lot of these sex stories.
Thank you so much for sharing all that with me. Absolutely love the show. And I guess, if you inspire some more women to think outside the box a little, then I guess you've done your job well. Thanks so much.
Okay, nice to meet you.